What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Bleacher Report. I hope that week 6 treated you well. Not too bad with all of these crazy injuries that happen and all of the flipped backfields here. But today we are talking buy or sell on bounce backs for fantasy stars here. Finally, some of our struggling stars actually look like they're seeing the light, but we got to talk about whether or not we're buying into it or if we got to sell it, what's real, what's fake here. Is the production just an outlier? Is it still a mess there? As always, go ahead and jump in the comments. Let us know your thoughts, any questions that you have, because again, it was a wild week. Aside from our bounce backs, we had backfields flipping in terms of Arizona and the LA Chargers, and then plus we maybe got potential running back drama here in Carolina. But let's go ahead and dive right in. We will start off here with my first potential bounce back here. And are we buying or selling it with Brian Thomas Jr.? Fantastic performance here. Finally, we're finally getting that BTJ that we saw in the back half of the season with our boy Mac Jones. We've finally seen it with Trevor Lawrence. Yay! 8 receptions on 10 targets, 90 yards, and a touchdown here. This was good production to see here from him, and I'm buying it. I'm buying it because it was good to see this level of production in a loss where the Jags only scored 12 points in a tough defensive matchup here. This was not an ideal situation. And it certainly wasn't a situation where the Jags were pushing aggressive volume because they had to chase points. It was still a relatively close game here. And it was a tough defensive matchup here. The Seahawks are, in fact, a tough defensive matchup. Just because Baker Mayfield was lighting them up the week before does not mean that the Seahawks defense is not stout. That's just Baker Mayfield. He's our outlier there. He's built different, right? But we are buying this. And the reason why we buy this, potentially more so than any other player on this list, is because there is no actual threat to Brian Thomas Jr.'s volume here. He can be the wide receiver 1 that he was last year when he got on that hot streak. There's nothing standing in his way. Yes, Travis Hunter, talented player, right? High draft pick. But he hasn't been that impressive or super productive here, unfortunately. He's yet to reach double-digit fantasy points, no receiving touchdowns, has a super low, not super low, but lower A dot than we would like to see there at 7.5, whereas Brian Thomas Jr. is at 12.4, much more agreeable to these nice boom games here. It is, possible that at some point the Jags fully commit to Travis Hunter on offense, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. They're sticking with this dual threat kind of situation here. And unfortunately, that just makes his production a little bit underwhelming there. Trevor Lawrence threw 42 passes, so we had decent volume there, completed 27. Not a perfect day from him, but decent enough. High enough volume, highest volume that he has had this season. Again, we still didn't see any benefits to Hunter, so that tells you there that this offense is just an offense that from a wide receiver perspective is going to run through Brian Thomas Jr. Our only concern here, right, is, one, Trevor Lawrence. He still has his problems. Turnovers are still happening, but he is operating Liam Cohen's system, the offense, well enough that Brian Thomas Jr. can continue this upswing in production here. And again, we wonder, how often we're going to see these ceiling games here. We've seen pretty good floors here, but we don't want the floor games. We want more of those ceiling games from him. Next week, we've got him facing the LA Rams. After the bye week, we've got Vegas, Houston, LA Chargers, Arizona, Tennessee, Indianapolis, New York Jets, Denver, Indianapolis again. So I will say the playoff schedule is not ideal. So we buy into the production, but just be aware that you might need to prepare a bailout plan if you're trending towards the fantasy playoffs, because he's still Brian Thomas Jr. He won't be a complete bust, but again, those are not the most ideal situations to be in. Moving on to our next player here, it is Ladd McConkey with the bounce back here. I know this is the one that everyone has been wanting because Ladd McConkey, it was a different situation than Brian Thomas Jr. because Brian Thomas Jr. was just looking bad with drops, underwhelming performances, right? And it looked like he was just stuck in his head. Ladd McConkey, on the other hand, was dealing with the fact that we were seeing massive production from other wide receivers. So it's not like Brian Thomas Jr.'s situation where nobody else was performing. We were having serious competition here and getting very concerned about Ladd. But now we're feeling a lot better here. Through the first 4 weeks of the season, obviously, it was Quentin Johnston and the Keenan Allen show. Ladd is finally coming through here. Fantastic performance here. 7 of 9 receptions, 100 yards, a touchdown, back-to-back weeks with touchdowns. His best game of the year here so far. We are buying into this bounce back, but with a couple of understandings. There are a couple of understandings that we have to have here. The past 2 games have been the easiest defensive matchups on the Chargers schedule thus far. Ladd McConkey, we talked about Travis Hunter's ADOT. Ladd McConkey's ADOT is 8.5, identical to Keenan Allen. That makes sense. That is the context in which he has been used and he will be used. And Keenan Allen and him do run rather parallel. And Quentin Johnston is the guy on the outside with the majority of the time spent on the outside and then the big ADOT, right? He's our deep threat. So the Chargers offensive line also has injuries. That's another caveat here that is resulting probably in the Chargers trying to get the ball out a little bit quicker here. It is benefiting Ladd McConkey. That makes a ton of sense. Positive here for us from a fantasy perspective, not for the Chargers. The offensive line issues are probably not going to go away anytime soon, so Ladd can continue to benefit from that. Additionally, Quentin Johnston's hamstring injury timeline is not known right now, but we do know a couple things about hamstring injuries. They're usually multi-week injuries, and they have a high rate of reoccurrence there. So we have to trust this production. We did see a little increase in role for Trey Harris to help compensate for the lack of QJ, but Harris, just a rookie, not someone they're going to really lean into. Ladd McConkey has stepped into a great situation where he can be the Ladd McConkey that we saw last year here. So we're buying here, but we're understanding there are specific reasons as to why his production has taken an uptick over the past couple of weeks. I'm going to go to the chat here from Abe Shaw, 23. Should I give up on Jakobi Meyers? Yeah, unfortunately. I was actually just in the middle of making a video about this same exact topic, recommending Jakobi Meyers as a drop. And I hate to do that. I hate to say drops on guys that were very reliable fantasy performers last year, but unfortunately, in the context of this offense, Geno Smith looking as bad as he's looked in a while, right? It's like, did you revert back to new? Like, it's been a little suspect here. So yeah, unfortunately, the production had just been underwhelming. 7 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points. We got to move on. And he's done this with Brock Bowers out. Oh, we should have seen an uptick in production there, so we don't feel good about it. D Pacheco, 8. Should I sell Rashee Rice for BTJ and Ramondre? Oh, that's a fairly even trade there. I don't mind that, particularly for BTJ. Ramondre is going to continue to be frustrating. The offense is Drake May. And Drake May throwing to literally everybody. Drake May running. Drake May just being Drake May. So Ramondre, regardless of, Gibson going down, Ramondre's the lead back there, but he's still going to be volatile on a regular basis there. He doesn't look fantastic, but Rashee for BTJ, fairly even trade, and you're getting upside there with a higher ceiling there for BTJ as well, and less competition like we talked about. So I like that one for you. JC 2408 trade T. Higgins or Wan'Dale Robinson for Zay Flowers. Yes to T. Question mark to Wan'Dale. T. Higgins, we'll talk about him in a second here. But again, the production has been a little bit underwhelming. And we'll actually talk about the Ravens offense in a little bit here too. When we're looking at Zay Flowers, obviously not the most ideal situation, but we will get, the Ravens have said we're getting Lamar Jackson back after the bye week. They said, no, this is awful. You have to come back, man. Hamstring is healed. Let's go. So we'll be getting Zay back. We're getting Lamar back, and Zay will be a little bit back on the table there. So yeah, if you want to make that trade for a little risk and higher upside swing, I'm not opposed to that. Wan'Dale, on the other hand, again, he is the wide receiver one of that offense, so you do have to consider that. And Jackson Dart has looked amazing. Moving on to Jameson Williams here. Are we buying or selling the bounce back that he had? 6 receptions on 7 targets, 66 yards, and a touchdown here. We are selling. Oops. Yeah, we're going to sell here. This was this was a weird game. The Lions weren't exactly pushing high pass volume. Amon-Ra St. Brown did have 9 receptions, which is in line with expectations, but it was just for 45 yards. This was an outlier game. This was a serious outlier game for the entire offense there. Jameson's 7 targets are in line with what we expect from him on a good day. We can't look at this and forget, though, and get too popped and forget that we had 3 straight weeks of 6 or less fantasy points. This situation was more dire than what we were seeing from BTJ and Ladd McConkey. Quite frankly, the floor was just kind of abysmal here. When the floor is literally getting a single reception, that is a major scary problem. A single reception on a single target here. When you look at this game, and that was week 5, by the way, that was not way back when. That was week 5 where he got 1 reception on 1 target there. But when you look at this game and the overall performance of the Detroit offense, it is not a coincidence that Jameson had this performance in a game where the matchup leans more heavily on the pass. And both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs were shut down. Monty had 8 fantasy points. Jahmyr Gibbs had 7 fantasy points. That's an outlier game. That is outside of the norm here. So for him to have a big bounce back in an outlier game tells us that we might want to be a little bit apprehensive here. The Lions offense made a heavy shift towards leaning very aggressively on Amon-Ra St. Brown this season. That makes sense. I mean, Amon-Ra is fantastic. I don't expect this production from Jameson on a week-to-week basis here. It would be one thing if there was some kind of floor that we could rely on, but again, the floor is 1 reception. That's not good, people. We essentially have 2 boom game scenarios for Jameson Williams that we have seen this season. One game where he had the boom was an ideal matchup with Chicago. Game 2 where he had the boom, the one that we just saw here, was a game where the run doesn't work. So the requirement for facing for Jameson Williams to have these boom games is for him to face a terrible defense or a defense that could shut down the running backs. When you look at the schedule, realistically, there are only 2 matchups, the LA Rams and Green Bay, maybe 3 if I'm being generous to Philadelphia's struggling team right now, that can provide that situation for him. 3 games out of the remaining 10. The math doesn't favor us. We got to sell on this one. Let's move on to our next player here, and then I'll go to the chat real quick. Ja'Marr Chase. We're going to talk about Ja'Marr Chase here and whether or not we buy or sell the bounce back. I won't bury the lead here. We buy the bounce back. 10 receptions, 12 targets, 94 yards, 1 touchdown. Flacco is not winning any awards here, but it was certainly better than what we have been working with Jake Browning. Although, to be fair to Jake Browning, he did literally give us just 30 fantasy points in the last game to Ja'Marr Chase. So I am not going to speak too ill on him for that. Chase just comes through. It's less about the quarterback and the fact that Ja'Marr Chase just has an outrageous ceiling, is just beyond talented. He's played 6 games this season. 3 of those games have been below 10 fantasy points. 3 of those games have been above 25 fantasy points. He has one of the strongest ceilings in the league, and the quarterback situation, unfortunately, it doesn't limit his ceiling. It just makes the floor a little bit shakier. So we just have to accept that as a reality here. We still got the same Ja'Marr that can get us outrageous fantasy production, but unfortunately, sometimes there are times where it's just going to be a little bit underwhelming. It's definitely new territory for us, right? When we look at Ja'Marr Chase, he had just 1 game below double-digit fantasy points last season. But when you look at the ceiling, and here's where we feel very positive, he had 6 games last season above 25 fantasy points. So technically speaking, we are pacing above that, which means, hey, this is something that is probably working in our favor, the Bengals defense being absolutely awful. Additional caveat there with the Bengals defense, Trey Hendrickson dealing with the back injury. They said day-to-day, but again, we've had trade speculation again, which makes sense because he's on a 1-year deal. And if the Bengals, don't win over the next few weeks here, they could simply be in a position to sell, call it a season there. Chase's ceiling is stable. We got to take the L sometimes on those floor games, but the upside that he offers and the way that he can just go out there and win your fantasy matchup and erase all the other bad stuff that everybody else does, it's worth it there. I'm going to go to the chat here real quick before we move on to our next player. From Mighty Guardian, trade Walker for Pittman. 12-man, I need wide receiver help. That's even to me. And I defend Walker a lot, and I am a Michael Pittman fan on that one. That is a fairly even trade if you need wide receiver help. Obviously, this past week was frustrating. Sometimes I guess maybe Daniel Jones is a little too good because he doesn't have to focus. I guess he's upgraded to the point where he doesn't have to hyper focus in on one person. He can spread the ball around everywhere. And we've got serious talent in there with Tyler Warren, and Josh Downs is looking good too. But ultimately, Pittman is the wide receiver 1 of this offense. It was just a weird game. Normally, he's been incredibly reliable. He's been pacing so much higher in terms of touchdowns. The touchdowns he has on the season has literally already exceeded or tied the vast majority of seasons previously. So we're eating here good with Michael Pittman. This was just a good, a bad matchup here for him, an underwhelming production. So this is a good buy low opportunity here. From T, Crutchfield 3. Trade Derrick Henry for Swift and Bourne. I would not do that. And we will talk about it. There's valid reason for not doing that. Swift, that's one of those ones where we've had too much smoke around the potential of Chicago trading for a running back. Swift is the RB1. He's been okay. But if they're feeling like their team has a legitimate chance to turn around and make a push here, especially with Minnesota being a little bit underwhelming as well, if they're looking at the defense or the division and saying, hey, we can push forward here. We've got the offense to do so. We just need a little bit of an upgrade. I would not be shocked if they make an addition to the backfield there. Because, it's not the first time Ben Johnson would have moved away from DeAndre Swift there. So be very careful of that one. I am pro Kendrick Bourne through and through, but be careful of that on DeAndre Swift. I wouldn't go that direction. For my told y'all, which should I bench? Rice versus the Raiders, Tet versus the Jets, Adams versus the Jags, BTJ versus the Rams. This one is pretty simple here. It's Tet, unfortunately. And we're going to talk about him potentially here in a little bit. A little spoiler alert here. But yeah, unfortunately with Tet McMillan here, Jets defense does appear to be pulling it together well. They got additional help back. They have one more person, Quincy Williams, on IR that might be coming back this week potentially here. So again, overall, their defense might tighten up here real quick. The others are just in better matchups and clear volume opportunities there. So unfortunately, got to bench Tet, although we do love him. Moving on to the next player here, we're going to talk about, let's go back to the Bengals here. Let's talk about T. Higgins. We talked about Jamar Chase here. T. Higgins, not a massive game here, but I wanted to include him in this bounce back because I think it's very important that we make a comparison here between him, several players on this list, and that of Jamar Chase as well. Interesting game here. 5 receptions, 8 targets, 62 yards here. I wanted to include T again because while the production wasn't high, he's had 11 fantasy points in each of the past 2 games. So we are definitely seeing a positive trend here. So that's awesome. And it's tied directly to the positive trend for Jamar Chase. It's just happening on a much lower level here. But we feel encouraged that the offense is at least heading in a more positive direction here. And again, Flacco is an improvement. Now we know that his production does come on a lesser and more volatile scale than Jamar Chase. But again, we want to emphasize here whether or not he's a bounce back because he's a high valued asset that flies a lot in terms of trade opportunities here in your fantasy leagues. And this is a sell situation, unfortunately. So sorry to T. Higgins here. Again, Joe Flacco is an improvement, but if there is not enough consistent volume to this offense, Higgins is the one that naturally suffers here. He has the same floor issue as Jamar Chase, unfortunately, like very similar there. But the difference is while they have very similar floors right now, typically the floor difference is much different right now, but much different in past years. But right now the floor is very similar between him and Jamar Chase. The big difference here is that T. Higgins has not had a ceiling like at all this season, unfortunately. The 11 fantasy points, that's the ceiling right there. So we're not feeling super positive about the fact that we're not getting massive production out of him. At least when you look at a guy like Jameson Williams that we talked about that was a sell, and I think this kind of emphasizes why T might be even more of a sell here. At least when we look at Jameson Williams, yeah, the floor is abysmal, right? But he at least gives us a ceiling or something that we can look forward to. With T. Higgins in the context of this offense, we're not getting a ceiling in any way, shape, or form. And we know the ceiling exists, so it's weird because we did see the ceiling exist way back in 2023 when Browning was starting the back half of the season. But the offense is just not working right now, and perhaps that is a function of the offensive line. And again, you don't want to rely on T. Higgins rest of season if this is the best that we can get here. Higgins is a big play receiver. He really thrives as well off of volume, and that just doesn't exist for him right now. 5 receptions was a season high. It had been 3 receptions max in the past, I think 3 or 4 weeks there. That's not good, unfortunately. We are at a situation where we're selling this bounce back here. I don't think it is trending in enough of a positive direction for us to really buy into it. I'm going to move on to our next player here. Our number 6-ish one, I believe, or 7. I sometimes I struggle to count. But hey, statistics, they work out for me. Tet McMillan is the next player on this list. Finally, our breakout game here from Tet. And we talked about it a little bit when I did the chat question there. Finally, 3 receptions, 5 targets, not massive, right? 29 yards, but 2 touchdowns. Yay! We are buying-ish this. We're buying, but ish. We got to contextualize it a little here because there's good and there's bad. The bad, let's start off with the bad, and then we'll talk about the good. The bad is the volume is awful in this performance for what we should have gotten against Dallas. Dallas is literally the most quarterback friendly and wide receiver friendly matchup in the league heading into this week. But we can't excuse it. Here's the good. The volume being low wasn't a function of the offense doing terribly. It was more so a function of the offense knowing that, or from a game perspective from Carolina, Dallas is not just vulnerable through the air, they are vulnerable on the ground. And this was a highly motivated Rico Dowdle that we got in this matchup here. So he was tearing them apart. If Rico Dowdle was out there just absolutely demolishing the Cowboys, to the point where you're saying, okay, just give him 30 carries. He had 30 carries for 183 yards. Yeah, if you got that level of volume, there's not going to be pass volume here. So that's okay. This is not a underwhelming performance from Ted McMillan because we know that the volume simply didn't exist because Rico Dowdle was just thriving. But here's where the positive really comes in here. So for one, this was a fine game from Bryce Young. 7 of 25 here for 199 yards. Positively, the offense was just moving very coherently, and Rico was getting it done on the ground. So we finally got those red zone opportunities for Ted McMillan. So I can excuse and be okay with a low volume pass game as long as the run game is pushing us towards the red zone. And then we are getting those red zone targets and touchdowns for Ted that we were missing here. So this is good. We got a nice balance. We've got evidence that Ted McMillan can, in fact, be a red zone target. We knew that from him being a prospect, right? But we got the evidence that he can have it within this offense, and we got the evidence that that we've seen a 100-yard game from him. So we can have volume, we can have touchdowns, we can have it all. We just got to get them to coexist together. So we at least feeling positive, like this is positively trending here. So while it might seem like a sell situation because the volume was low, there are positive takeaways here. The floor has been very safe, and we finally got a nice little ceiling game here. So we're feeling good about this. Let's go to the chat here real quick from JC 2408. Who are you targeting when selling Higgins? I would definitely pivot to a running back. When we're doing these sells, possibly you might want to upgrade. There are wide receiver injuries that happen, so possibly you might want to upgrade from a wide receiver perspective. But really, with a player like that, it's more advantageous to try and go and attack somebody in your fantasy league that has lucked out in the fact that all their running backs are healthy and perhaps they just drafted well in the mid rounds and have guys like Javonte Williams and whatnot. That's a good little target right there. Javonte is the clear RB1. We had Jaden Blue active. He got, a few carries and 0 yards. It was just not effective at all. Carolina's defense, let's contextualize this real quick here because Carolina's defense was objectively awful last year and just a layup from a run perspective. If you look at it, they have actually been doing extremely well at stopping the run. They have turned a corner here. They even managed to hold Dak to a very reasonable amount here. So this was actually not a fantastic matchup for Javonte Williams because they have really been limiting volume on the ground here. So Javonte, that type of trade, that's a good one that I would target there. From CM153, sell Saquon and Tet for Rome and Brees. Yeah, if you need to upgrade at wide receiver, I would do that. Rome is operating at such a high level here. And what's interesting here is that Pittsburgh just came through saying they're in the market for a wide receiver. Wouldn't DJ Moore just fit perfectly opposite of DK Metcalf? I don't know. Maybe I will start that trade rumor myself there because they have so many assets there. So I think Rome potentially has an even higher ceiling here. We've seen him be incredibly effective. So I don't mind that. I do have hope that we'll have a Saquon bounce back, but potentially what we're seeing here is what we thought we might see heading into the season, that the level of volume that he had last year was just so astronomical that we would see a natural decline in efficiency this year. The offensive line is just kind of not operating at the level that we expect them to, aside from the tush push, apparently. But overall, there are concerns there. So if you want to make the adjustment, also because Brees is a trade candidate as well, so I don't hate that, but just be aware you are taking a significant downgrade there with Brees, because if he stays within the context of that Jets offense, he's talented. Volume is there for him. He succeeded on the ground, but man, the touchdowns are not there. So just be aware, if you make that trade, it's for the purpose of you upgrading at Rome, and you need to feel super comfortable at running back, because Brees can potentially be a problem rest of season. He's going to have a solid, decentish floor. Last week was a bad matchup in a bad situation, right? But overall, volume has been there. We have no Braylon Allen anymore, so we at least got that going for us. But unfortunately, the touchdowns not there. From C BHL 23, do I do Pickens for McMillan and BTJ? Oh yeah. I like that a lot for you. I do. Pickens and BTJ is a fairly even trade there, and then you get the up there of Ted McMillan as well. BTJ can get to the level of volume that we have seen from Pickens. And then Pickens does also have CeeDee Lamb coming back. Now, Pickens was doing well before CeeDee Lamb got injured. Touchdowns were there from him. But volume in terms of receiving yards was lower, obviously, when CD was in there, right? Because he just garners so many targets and so much yardage, right? So Pickens is not a must sell for me just because Dak is going to continue to chuck the ball with Dallas's defense being so awful. But I do think that's a good opportunity to double up on wide receiver there, especially with all the wide receiver injuries we've had. Good Lord, it's been miserable here. Let's do our final buy or sell here. It is Derrick Henry. I teased earlier that we are going to talk about the Ravens here because we had that question about Zay Flowers as a potential trade buy or sell there. Derrick Henry, we are buying this bounce back here. I feel like when Derrick Henry has become oddly controversial this year, I don't know why, but I talk about Derrick Henry a lot and then do videos about him, and I've gotten a lot of interesting interesting feedback about Derrick Henry because I've talked about him as a buy low, and there seems to be a consensus that the Ravens offense is just bad, and that Henry is cooked. Thank God we've got this game here as a friendly reminder that the Ravens offense is in fact bad without Lamar Jackson, but Derrick Henry is not cooked. People, it's Derrick Henry. There's not a level of cook that he can ever be here. 24 carries, 122 yards, over 5 yards per carry. This was a Derrick Henry game, right? It wasn't a ceiling game, unfortunately. It was below what we wanted to see from a fantasy perspective, but the level of performance is what we wanted to see from Derrick Henry here. Unfortunately, we know the drill with Derrick Henry. The Ravens, when they trail, Derrick Henry suffers. He's not a pass catcher, right? They pull him out. They put in Justice Hill, maybe a little Keaton Mitchell or something. But unfortunately, those are just bad situations for him. Now, the Ravens lost this game, but they remained fairly close. Their defense pulled it together just a tiny bit here. Just enough to where they could still lean on Derrick Henry and rely on the run and not have to pull him and chuck the ball here. We got a bye week here, and Lamar Jackson, again, I talked about it, is expected back. Harbaugh basically, flat out said it. Obviously, when you get to this record, it's a, hey, man, you got to get back here and get out there. So when they return from the bye week, and here is why we are buying into this production here. Because one, he looked fantastic and looked like our regular Derrick Henry, and not a good matchup with an LA Rams defense that can be very stingy against the run. They stopped Saquon Barkley, remember? But the matchups here upcoming, Chicago, Miami. I mean, those are two of the best matchups that you can ask for. Minnesota has been stronger against the pass and far more vulnerable against the run. They're actually a good matchup against the run. Then we have Cleveland, not a good matchup. Jets, not a good matchup here. But then we get Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati again, New England, Green Bay, several strong games of 3 strong game, very easy matchups there. And the playoff schedule, Cincinnati, New England, Green Bay that I talked about, it's not as bad as it looks in terms of playoff run. New England is really the only issue there. Green Bay's offense doesn't operate well, doesn't operate well enough, unfortunately, that they'll run away with the game there. So Baltimore can be competitive and Derrick Henry will be in it. So I like Derrick Henry as a buy. We're buying this bounce back here for sure. Going to the chat here and then we'll wrap things up. From Ikeon, Genty for Rice straight up. It depends on your needs. If you're good at running back, I don't mind that because I mean, we can't deny Patrick Mahomes is on fire right now. So in terms of the opportunity that Rashee Rice is heading into, if you're suffering at wide receiver and you need a wide receiver one, Worthy has been okay, but I do think that Rashee Rice has the potential to step in and be the wide receiver one. But if you don't have, just be careful there because I think that we're going to see the Raiders continue to rely on Genty. He's been doing much better with the volume there. So I don't think, just make sure that you're good at running back there because he is going to be a solid RB1 rest of season. From E. Kenny 88 Ibuka for Ibuka and Brown for T and Kyron. I assume that's AJ Brown and not Chase Brown. I don't know. If it's, well, let's answer it 2 ways here. Okay, it's AJ Brown. There we go. It is AJ Brown. No, that's a lot. And again, like if you're looking forward to get Kyron, if that's the main thing, if you're looking to buy T, we talked about it. The ceiling is not there. You're looking at 11 fantasy points. You're taking a significant downgrade there. If you're selling Ibuka, I understand like one, the hamstring injury might keep him out multiple weeks, but you are still selling very low here on him. for me, it would be literally just Ibuka for Kyron would be more of a trade that I would kind of whittle that down there because losing both of those receivers for T, who you're not going to be happy with, but you know the upgrade at Kyron. Kyron is a good trade target, but I don't like the sell there. For Mighty Guardian, sell Scattaboo high, targeting Nico, buy low from a team where wide receivers are stacked. I'm good with that. I don't think that you have to sell Scattaboo. I think the production is sticky, and Tyrone Tracy, unfortunately, is going to take a back seat there. And the offense is doing very well with Jackson Dart. I think he's for real there. But if you need that help at wide receiver, that's a very, very fair trade there. So I'm good with that. From Walkie 2, who wins? Scattaboo, CD and Scattaboo for Achan and Rashee Rice. That's super even. I think I lean towards. I think I lean towards a little bit the Achan and Rice side, just a little bit, just because we've seen where they come back and be good, but not really ascending to that massive level where he would be the clear wide receiver one. So I think, you know, we've seen Travis Kelce be just, you know, average at best, really just a little bit below average there. So I think the potential for Rashee Rice to put up CD Lamb type of numbers exists. We've seen it before. So like a smidge there with Achan and Rice potentially. From JC 2408, but it's super even, super even. JC 2408, would you move Brees/Higgins for Bucky Irving? I've got concerns on that. We've got no timeline on Bucky, and Todd Bowles came out and said that Bucky is not in play for this week. So if we're talking about Monday and he has already ruled out Bucky Irving, that's high key concerning. That means he's not even close there. So in a perfect world, and he's coming back in 2 weeks, I like that trade. In an in a risky world where this could be a situation where we get to the end of the week and they say he's going on IR, man, that's a high risk move right there. So I can't advise it. Even trade, good trade, but we're in like a no man's land here, unfortunately. Although I think you said you have handcuff as white. You know, yeah. If you've got white, I don't hate that, actually. Yeah. You said you have the handcuff as Rashad White, so yeah, you know what? You can go ahead and make that because Sean Tucker did contribute, but White's really the clear RB1 there. We've got enough evidence in multiple years of sample size on that one. One more chat here from Jordan Johnson. What would you trade for Henry, and who should we target? So if you're selling Henry right now, he's still more of a buy for me. But if you were looking to buy Derrick Henry and potentially selling, I do think you're still going to have to give a solid asset here. Maybe you would package up a Jameson Williams and another running back and try to get some money that needs an upgrade that way. It's tough to say because that one right there with Derrick Henry, it's really dependent on your views of your league mates there. That one's a really tricky one, unfortunately. But that wraps things up. I appreciate you all joining in. Make sure that you are turning your alerts on again, because good and bad, there's fantasy news coming constantly in terms of these injuries here. But again, I'll be with you every single week, every single Monday to help you with fantasy advice to win your league. You can also find me across all social media platforms at It's Sarah Time. So have a fantastic week. Good luck with your lineups. I hope the injuries do not hit you and you can get the win this week. I will talk to you again next week, guys.